Uh, Hello there, my name is Ivan Cornford. I'm just here to introduce today's Zoom session, which is around visual awareness, and it's going to be given by Libby Hillhouse. And I'm going to hand over to Libby, and she'll explain everything about this session and related points. Thank you. Over to you, Libby.
Thank you, Ivan. Well, welcome to the Visual Awareness Training. My name is Libby and I work for North East Sensory Services. I'll tell you a little bit about who they are in a wee minute. This is a new visual awareness training session that we're running, and it comes in different parts, so everyone will get a chance to watch this recorded presentation. There is also another DVD that talks a bit more about visual impairment and includes a video that shows how to do sighted guiding skills, which is how to guide somebody who's blind or visually impaired. And we've also put together 2 resource kits which can be booked out through Ivan at Scottish Care, with activities for you to carry out to explore visual awareness and what that might mean for somebody and how it might affect somebody a little bit more, and find out a little bit more about aids and adaptations. So really what we're hoping that you'll get out of the visual awareness training over the different sessions that we're organising is basically a better awareness about what sight loss is and how it affects people, the impact that it has on people's lives. There's quite a lot of misconceptions and misunderstandings about what sight loss is, so it's really important that we just raise a little bit of awareness. As I've already mentioned, we'll hopefully introduce you to some of the kind of aids and equipment and adaptations that can help people take part in activities, so feel included in what's going on, and also enable people to be as independent as possible. And throughout the session, hopefully you'll get some tips for how you might support your residents who've had a sight loss. We'll also tell you a bit about Nest services and how to refer to us. And at the end of the session, we'll talk a bit more about the resource kits that you can book out through Ivan. So we'll start off by going through basically a little bit about who Nest is. We're a charity that works across the northeast of Scotland, supporting people who are blind and or deaf. So our mission is achieving independence for blind and deaf people. Obviously, today's session is just about visual impairment, so we won't be talking about hearing loss, but we do support people with hearing loss and deafness as well. So across in Aberdeen City and Murray and Dundee, we have what we call fully integrated joint sensory services. So we're a one-stop shop for people who have a sensory loss, providing all sorts of information and advice. In Angus, the model is slightly different in that we have specialist information and advice service. We don't have the full range of services. We don't have social work, for example, in Angus. That's still run by Angus Council. But we do have rehabilitation officers for visual impairment and field workers who will go out and assess people's needs and provide support and information and advice about living with a sensory loss. And that includes giving information and advice about equipment and daily living aids. So that's just a very brief overview about who Ness is. We're doing this training with funding from Angus Society for the Blind and in partnership with Scottish Care. Just to let you know that as well. We also have lots of other services that we run. I won't go into too much detail because all the available information is available on our website. We do have some clubs and groups that meet up around Angus, kind of social groups really for folk to meet up and have a chat and do some activities together. And you'll see some other things listed there as well. So what I'd suggest is if you want to find out a bit more, is go and have a look on our website.
Is that later, where we would get details of who to contact if we went to the net? Or is that on this presentation?
Yeah. I'll put that later on,
okay,
at the end, in terms of referrals. So I wanted to make you aware about the Scottish Government See Here strategy, because this is a 10-year strategy that the Scottish Government is working to, and we very much work within as well. A strategic framework for meeting the needs of people with a sensory impairment. So that includes people with a sight loss, a hearing loss, deaf British Sign Language users, people who are deafblind, and people with a hidden sensory loss, which very much applies to people living in care homes as well as people with learning disabilities. The research that was carried out when the Scottish Government was putting together the See Here strategy identified that a significant proportion of people with learning disabilities and people who were living in care homes had undetected sensory loss and therefore were not necessarily being supported with their sensory loss. So very much part of the strategy is about early detection, so picking up the signs earlier that people are having problems with their sensory loss. Better assessments, more seamless provision of support to enable independence so people are able to manage and cope with day-to-day life with a sensory loss, which it takes a bit of effort and getting used to. A huge part of the See Here strategy is also about raising awareness of sensory loss, because the research again highlighted the fact that people were not aware, or people with the sensory loss felt that other people weren't aware about how sensory loss affected them, whether it's sight loss or hearing loss. So that's a big part of my job, is about raising awareness, and that's very much what this training is about as well, helping people to just think about, well, if somebody's got a sight loss, how might they be feeling, what might become difficult for them, what might they need a bit of help with. So just to go through some very basic facts and figures, some of you might find some of this quite surprising. In Scotland, there's around 35,000 people who are registered as blind or partially sighted, with another 140,000 living with significant sight loss. I'll talk a bit about being registered later on in the presentation, explain what that means. So 1 in 5 of adults over the age of 75 has a sight loss, and half of adults over the age of 90 has a sight loss. So basically, sight loss increases with age. So again, if you're working in residential care, that lends itself to a huge proportion of the people that you're supporting having some kind of sight loss. Over the next sort of 20 or 30 years, the prevalence is set to double. And again, the research suggests that the incidence of sight loss in care homes is likely to be much higher than sort of the national statistics. Often people go into care homes, obviously, when they've had some kind of crisis, or they've fallen and injured themselves, and sight loss is actually one of the huge predictors of increased risk of falls. So how do you recognise if somebody's got, I've gone back too quickly. How do you recognise if somebody's got visually impaired? Some people will use a long cane. Some people might have a guide dog or wear dark glasses. Some people might use a symbol cane, which is a small white cane that they carry in front of them. However, proportionately, actually very few people use these symbols. Often there's much more subtle signs that says that somebody might be experiencing a visual impairment.
Yeah, you don't see a lot of people with those signifiers out and about.
No, those are the ones that people think of.
Yeah.
But actually, if you think about the population, there's far more people who haven't got any of those obvious symbols of visual impairment who still have a visual impairment. So to go through some of the very simple ways of picking up that somebody maybe have a visual impairment, they might be walking much more slowly or more hesitantly. Obviously, lots of people walk slightly more slowly or more hesitantly, but that could be, it's just to say that sight loss could be one of the reasons why that's happening. They could be using their hands to feel as they walk, or as they're looking for things. Bumping into things, tripping or falling is a huge indicator that someone's experiencing a sight loss, some kind of sight loss as well. And we'll talk about trying to keep surfaces clear for later on. They might stop recognising you and no longer be able to recognise your face. They may or may not be able to recognise your voice. So again, it's one of those assumptions that we sometimes make. Sometimes people have difficulty making eye contact, or make slightly different kind of eye contact at the side of their eye, or move their head to get you in their field of vision. Sometimes people hold things up really, really close so they can see them better, because they're not able to see sort of a normal arm's length distance. Things like knocking things over or spilling things could be an indicator that somebody's not seeing things that are around about them, so they're knocking them or spilling them over, spilling things, and lots and lots of other simple things. Sometimes there's no indication whatsoever that somebody's got a visual impairment. There's nothing to say. There's no obvious signs that somebody isn't seeing very well. And I think it's one of those assumptions that we can make that makes us think, well, if somebody doesn't look visually impaired, then they're not. And that's just not the case. That's more common, is that there's nothing to tell you. Maybe very subtle pieces of behaviour that you may or may not be aware of. So, okay. Common conditions. I'm not going to talk you through what the common conditions are. I'm just going to list them, basically, because there's over 200 sight loss conditions, which is far too many to go through. So these are just to give you the names of them, but these also kind of explain the main ways that vision is affected, and the different ways that vision is affected. So it gives you the spectrum of how sight is affected by different sight loss conditions. So age-related macular degeneration, or AMD, or MD, or macular degeneration, all kind of used interchangeably. Glaucoma, cataracts, diabetic retinopathy, and other diabetic-related diseases, and vision loss related to stroke. So, what is visual impairment? Well, it's lots of different things. People with a visual impairment can lose their visual acuity. So your visual acuity is your ability to make out features, details, and colours. So basically, that goes. So you stop being able to see things clearly. Images can become distorted. Images can start moving and blurring, so people everything moves and blurs depending on the different sight conditions that somebody might have. People can lose fields of vision. So a field of vision is an area of vision that you can see. So people can lose their central vision, the vision that's right in front of them, their peripheral vision, which is the vision to the sides of your and the bottom of your eyes. They can lose a field of vision in the left, the right, the top, the bottom, just depending on where the injury is or on what's going on for them. Lots of people with visual impairment, most people will experience what's called glare, and that's when bright light causes discomfort. So for example, in the winter when it's low-lying suns and the streets are wet, so the light's bouncing off the streets, that can be very uncomfortable for people, and that's why people will often wear dark glasses. People will still get glare from indoor lights as well, depending on the kind of light bulbs that there are. So natural daylight is really important for people who are visually impaired. Lots of people will also have difficulty seeing in poor light. So in poor light, their vision deteriorates because the eyes are not able to use the cells effectively to see when the lighting isn't good. We all need extra light as we get older, and for people who are visually impaired, it's particularly important to have good lighting. Eyes will often take time to adjust to light, to changes in lights. So moving from dark to light or light to dark can often people take a bit of time. So for example, if somebody's been inside and it's been a dark room and then they go out into the bright sunshine, they may need a bit of time to let their eyes adjust. Likewise, going from bright outside doors coming into a darkened room, it can take them a bit of time, and those are the times when people may need an extra bit of help to manage that. Things like depth perception become much more difficult. So again, things like seeing steps, reaching for things, all those kind of things that use your depth perception can be much more difficult. And some people, they reckon far more people than we were initially aware of, have what's called Charles-Bonnet syndrome. And that's that basically causes visual hallucinations. And then the hallucinations are basically caused by the brain trying to stimulate itself because it's not getting the information through the eyes. So it's trying to fill in the gaps, if you like. And often that can be very vivid imagery that people see. And obviously people can be quite alarmed by it and quite scared by it sometimes until they know what it is. So it's important that if people are experiencing that you go and have a chat with probably the doctor or the optician first of all, because obviously hallucinations can be associated with other things as well, and that's one of the things that people can be frightened of if they're having hallucinations, that they're actually developing some kind of mental illness, where it's not necessarily. It can be caused by the visual impairment.
Okay.
So we're going to go through the common ways that vision can be affected in different ways. So you'll see on this slide that all the straight lines have become wavy. And that often happens in the early stages of conditions like macular degeneration. Just things start to move. So we can see how disorientating that could be for people and how frightening. People can also lose their central vision, as I mentioned already. So your central vision is the vision you use for reading, writing, recognising faces and picking up colour. So in this image, I'm seeing it on my left. So I'm assuming on your left as well. It's what somebody would see with normal vision on the right, what somebody might see with a loss of central vision. So again, we were talking about not being able to recognise faces, and that can be why. These are just representations. This isn't an absolute of this is what somebody has, can or can't see if they've got a central vision loss. These are just representations, but everyone's experience will be quite unique and different, to their own circumstances. People can also lose peripheral vision, and that's a vision, as I've mentioned, I think already, that you use when you're walking around. So, for example, they just might see through what's called a tunnel vision. Basically, their eyes become like tunnels, and they can only see a small amount of detail in front of them. They can't see things approaching from the side or the bottom or often up ahead. So this scene is actually a street, and you can see how difficult that's going to be to navigate that kind of space. Lots of people will also have what's called reduced visual acuity. So again, on the left, you can see that it's fairly clear. The person can see all the details. On the right, the visual acuity is really poor, and everything's become really blurred and difficult to see. So again, you can see how difficult it's going to be to carry out normal day-to-day activities.
And it's also that you can see all of the hazards on the left. On the right, you see no hazards.
Yes.
So the hazards, the uneven road, there's road signs, there's cars and that. You have no idea that that's really there.
No, you can't see the edge of the road. You can see vague shapes, but yeah, that's about it. It's vague shapes. You can't really
your
make
hazard
sense
awareness has gone completely, hasn't it? On that? Yes, yeah.
People can also lose kind of one half of their vision. It's basically one half of vision in each eye, but that becomes losing half their field of vision if assuming using two eyes to see a whole field of vision.
Okay.
And this is really common with acquired brain injuries and strokes. And what you'll see, the person's not seeing what's on the left, and they're not seeing that somebody's approaching from, they're about to crash into somebody as they're walking down the road. So this can happen on the left or the right. So it can be quite disorientating for people as well. So on this next slide, we see two pictures. On the left, you see the picture, the visual acuity is really significantly reduced. On the right, it's a bit blurry, but you can still make out the kettle, the plant, and the can of Coke. And really what these pictures are meant to illustrate is the importance of colour contrast for people who are visually impaired. So on the left, you can just make out the feature of the can of Coke. You may or may not be able to infer it's a can of Coke, but you can see the red against the pale background. And that's because of the difference between the red and the pale background is enough to be able to make out the red against it. But you can't see the kettle or the plant. It just kind of blurs. And that's because there's not enough colour contrast between the kettle and the pale yellow and the dark green and the pale yellow for that to be for people to be able to identify it. Using colour contrast is really important for people who are visually impaired because it enables them to make out features, and anything can be colour contrasted. So you could have colour contrasted bed covers, you could wear colour contrasted clothes, so it's easier for people to see your face against the background of your clothes. You can colour contrast table settings, we'll have a look at that later on. So all sorts of things can be colour contrasted. It's important to say that colour contrast is also really important for people who've got dementia, and I'll talk a little bit about dementia very briefly later on. So people's vision, when they come into your home, you may know whether or not they've got a visual impairment, but people's vision can change at any ages. As we see, there's a huge increase on the of sight loss developing between the ages of 75 and 90. It moves from 1 in 5 people over 75 to 1 in 2 of people over the age of 90. So it's really important that you monitor people's changes in vision. And these are questions that the Scottish Government has come up with as part of the See Here strategy that you can use to either ask or just to be asking yourself to monitor people's behaviours. So, for example, you might be able to sit down with somebody and go through all the questions, and they might be able to answer clearly. They might still have enough awareness about themselves, but other people might find that more difficult. So it might be that you observe changes in behaviour. So the kind of questions to think about or to ask would be: are you still able to read small print, or is that stopped? And this is reading things with glasses, because it's really important that people, whether or not they've got a visual impairment, you still support them to wear their glasses. So the visual impairment will occur despite the glasses. So the glasses are no longer correcting the vision enough, or not correcting the vision even with glasses. That's what causes a visual impairment. That's what a visual impairment is. It's not correctable by glasses.
Okay, yeah. I was beginning to wonder, because I wear glasses, that I had visual impairment, but obviously not, because the glasses can correct that.
Yes. But for somebody who should be wearing glasses and isn't, that becomes tantamount to living with a visual impairment, even though it's not technically a visual impairment.
Yes, I know if I take my glasses off, I will have difficulty reading the script in front of me.
Yes. So, but imagine that was happening to you, but with your glasses on.
Yes.
And that's really what we're talking about. Yeah.
Okay.
Is the person no longer recognising faces? Have you noticed that? Or can you ask them? Can you say to them, are you not recognising people now? Are they missing or overfilling cups because they're not seeing the edges of cups as they're pouring, making a cup of tea or pouring a drink of water? Are they finding it difficulty judging steps, stairs or curbs? So you may observe this behaviour, or they may stop just going out because suddenly these things have become much more difficult and they start to feel scared that they're going to fall. Are they finding it difficult to see even with glasses on? And this is really key. We've really mentioned glasses already, and I'll come back and talk briefly about glasses later on as well. Are they holding things up really close to see them because they're struggling to see them at sort of arm's length or sort of normal distance? Are they not finding their cups or seeing their food on their plate? To you, that might look as if they're not eating or drinking. But is it they're not into eating or drinking, or they can't see the cup, they can't find it, or they've forgotten that it's there and they're not seeing it to get that visual cue? Are they knocking things over more than they used to? Are you finding that the table they're knocking cups of water over, or knocking over a walking aid, or bumping into things, that kind of thing? These are the kind of questions that you can, again, ask the person or be observant of changes in people's behaviour. And a huge one is, have they fallen recently? Or has there been an increased number of falls recently? Because that's, as I've already mentioned, a huge predictor of undetected sight loss. So it's about having that conversation and just monitoring gently, or using these questions in a more formal way to assess people's vision as it can change. People might come in with a visual impairment and then it stays the same for a long time, and then it can take a huge dip as well, because visual impairment by its nature usually deteriorates, and it's important that that's monitored as well. So we mentioned earlier that there is a register for people who are blind and partially sighted. The language has now changed, so it's going to be sight impaired and severely sight impaired. And I'll try and explain very briefly what this means. Not everybody is registered. Not everybody meets these criteria. The ophthalmologist at the hospital decides if people meet these criteria, and they will fill in what's called a certificate and to certify the person. And they will ask the person if they want to be registered, and if the person does want to be registered, they'll send the certificate off to the registration body. I think in Angus, it's Angus Society for the Blind, I think, that holds a register. NES holds a register in the other areas that we operate. No, it used to be Angus Society for the Blind, that's wrong. I think it's the social work department. I'm not sure, actually. I need to check.
Okay, we'll find that out.
I'll check.
Yeah, that's no problem. I take it you're going to talk about what the benefits of being registered are.
The main benefits are it can make it easier to get access to some benefits.
Okay.
And again, research shows that people who are visually impaired have much higher cost of living because they often need to make adaptations, they often need to buy daily living aids, they might need to pay for transport because using public transport is far more difficult. Obviously, they're not able to drive. So there's extra living costs associated. So I'm not sure how that would work if somebody's in a residential care home, and the best thing to do would be to talk to a social worker and get proper advice about benefits in terms of that. The other thing it does is it provides accurate details to the people who plan services, so they know exactly who's there and who needs help and support. This is whoever provides the support locally, so basically NES, once we hear about you, we have to offer you, or I think it's a local authority in Angus, they have to by law offer you an assessment of need. If you're registered blind, often they'll just, even if you're registered partially sighted, they still offer you an assessment of need. But you don't have to be registered to get help and support. If you're still struggling with a significant sight loss, then contact the local support services. They're not just available if you're registered, or they're available to people who are not registered as well.
Okay. Oh, that's useful to know. Thank you.
So to be registered as what is now called sight impaired, but used to be called partially sighted, your visual acuity has to be between 3 out of 60 or 6 out of 60 with a full field of vision, or slightly better, 6 out of 18 with a large loss of field of vision. And what that means is, when you get your eyes tested, your eyes are measured as being 6 out of 6, so you can see at 6 metres what you should see at 6 metres. If your visual acuity is 3 out of 60, you have to stand 3 metres away to see what someone with normal vision would see at 60 metres.
Oh.
So it's quite difficult to get your head around, but it's like basically the person is only just able to read the biggest numbers on the chart that you get at the opticians. So that's to be registered partially sighted, and being registered partially sighted in layman's terms equates to about a 75% sight loss. So it's across both eyes. It's not just having one eye that doesn't work. That's not enough to be registered partially sighted. It has to be across both eyes.
Oh, okay.
To be registered blind, or what is now called severely sight impaired, your visual acuity has to be less than 3 out of 60 with a full field of vision, or slightly better, 6 out of 60, but again with a very reduced field of vision. So again, you would have to stand 3 metres away to see what someone with normal vision would see at 60 metres. And again, this kind of ranges from about 90% sight loss up to 100% sight loss. So that is about 5% of people who are registered blind have got no sight whatsoever. Most people have got a small amount of sight, and even though they're registered blind. And that's partly why they've changed the language, okay. I think. So it's really important that you know if somebody's still got a bit of vision, and that they're supported as much as possible to use the vision that they do have. So that's a little bit. So we'll talk a bit now about the impact of sight loss. And I'm sure you've got lots of experiences working with your residents, but it's important that we just kind of think about the ways it affects people. Everybody is different, and everybody copes with their sight loss in a different way, depending on all sorts of different personal factors. And everybody's vision will be different depending on what their diagnosis is in. And although we're talking about this as having one condition at a time, people can have multiple conditions as well as be short-sighted, long-sighted, and need reading glasses. So everybody is unique. It's important that you appreciate it from each individual person's perspective. So obviously mobility, moving around and finding your way, including using transport, can become very difficult. Mobility is about being able to kind of walk safely from A to B, but there's also orientation, knowing where you are in relation to everything else, knowing where landmarks are so you can find your way, and if you get lost, being able to find where you are, or often not being able to find where you are as well. So people can lose, if they lose an idea that the landmarks that they use to know where they are can become quite disorientated. Now often people that might mistake that disorientation for dementia, but it's not. It's been caused because the person is not seeing where they are, not seeing the landmarks that they normally use to locate where they are in relation to everything else. Obviously, anything related to kind of reading and writing, whether that be documents, medication, information, books, newspapers, signing for things, if they've got care plans that you're trying to get people to read and agree to, menus, posters for information, activity sheets, all that kind of thing becomes difficult. So people can feel quite excluded if they're not getting information, and it makes it much more difficult for them to learn to manage things for themselves. So it's important to think about how you enable that information to that person to get that information. We've already talked about difficulties recognising people. So again, coming back to that, it can be difficult recognising people. If you're in a group, how do you know who's in the group? Who do you know? Who do you know who you're talking to? Can you see what's going on around about you? People will also miss out on non-verbal and visual forms of communication. So a lot of what we do, how we communicate, is non-verbal, and people will often miss that. We use eye contact, for example, to talk about taking turns in conversations. So if somebody's got visually impaired, they may miss those non-verbal cues, and that can make it difficult for people to initiate conversation or start a conversation. How do you start up a conversation if you don't know who's sitting next to you because you can't see them clearly? So these are the kind of things that sometimes people might need a bit of help with. Obviously, all daily tasks become difficult, and it's not because people can't do things, it's because we use our vision to make a decision about how we're going to approach particular situations. And so, for example, think about getting dressed. You might be able to perfectly well get your clothes on, but you might not be able to match things up correctly because you can't see the colours. So you might want to, I remember one lady telling me that she'd put on one brown shoe and one black shoe and didn't realise until she was out, because to her they looked exactly the same, and she was mortified. So it's not that she can't get her shoes on, she can, but she maybe needs them to be organised or a bit of help to make sure she's matching things, because that can become very difficult. We often, as sighted people, know what's going on around about us because we scan rooms, we scan what's going on around about us, we can see who's standing, we can see somebody coming into the room holding a cup of tea and holding it towards us. Somebody who's visually impaired won't be able to see that. So, for example, if you knock on someone's door and go in and say hello and you're carrying their laundry to put it away, they might not see that. So they might not know that that's what you're doing. So it's important to tell people what's going on so they know what's going on around about it, because they won't be picking up the visual cues about that. So obviously all these things become very difficult and that can lead for people, and that can make them lose their confidence and also become quite isolated. They'll often stop doing things, they'll stop going out, they'll stop taking part in activities they've previously enjoyed because they start to it all becomes a little bit more difficult, and they may need a bit of help to keep doing that. And people can go through a sense of loss and grief. So the person that they used to be who could see is now not able to do all the things that they used to do, and that can lead to a process of loss and grief. So sometimes people can get stuck in. So when people are acting out, sometimes they'll get angry because they're stuck in that, no, this isn't happening to me stage of grief. And they need a bit of help, they need a bit of emotional support to kind of work their way through that and learn to live with it. And it does increase the risk of mental health problems significantly, particularly amongst older people, because often it's not just a sight loss that's going on, there's often other health conditions, other disabilities, and possibly dementia all starting at the same time, as well as being in that stage of life where things are slowing down, families are getting older, and there may be less people around about. Okay, so we'll move on. So that basically, this is sensory loss and other disabilities. As I've just mentioned, lots of people will have other things going on for them. 78% of people who have a visual impairment will also have another disability or health condition, and that's particularly the case for older people or people with learning disabilities as well. A larger incidence of mental health problems, and sometimes that can be caused by the sensory loss directly because of the experiences of becoming socially isolated and not stopping doing the things you enjoy. And often that mental health needs isn't necessarily addressed. It's often just thought, well, kind of put together with the sight loss and not addressed in its own right. And sometimes people will need a bit of help with their mental health as well. Many people with dementia will also have a sensory loss, and some of the symptoms of dementia cause problems with visual processing. So because of the damage within the brain isn't processing visual information in the same way as it used to. And often the symptoms can look very, very similar. So, for example, somebody with a sight loss might appear disorientated or confused or withdrawn, or sort of knock things over or see things differently. But those can also be misinterpreted as symptoms of dementia. And it's important that both are diagnosed, because one of the things that is thought is that if the sight loss is supported, it can actually alleviate some of the symptoms of the dementia. If people are then getting enough visual information, then they've got something to process. If they not getting enough visual information, then there's less to process, and that can actually aggravate the symptoms of the dementia.
Okay. So
that's a quick overview about sight loss. In the resource packs, and every care home I think is going to get a copy of this DVD. This DVD has been produced by Highlands and Islands Educational Learning Service, I think it's called, Shells. And this has been sort of endorsed by the Scottish Government as part of the See Here strategy. It's about half an hour e-learning module, so you can pop it into the DVD into a computer, and it goes through some different scenarios and also shows you some sighted guiding skills. And that's going to be one of the activities that's part of the resource kit for you to try out. Guiding is an important skill for people who are blind or visually impaired. They often rely on other people guiding them from place to place, and doing it correctly can help people feel much safer. To help people much safer. So I thought we'd run through some basic tips in terms of, if you're working in care homes, what's important for you to think about. First of all, it's important that you know how your residents are affected by that, how their sight loss affects them. And like I've already said, that'll be different for everybody. It's important to record it in their care plan so that you know. So, for example, do you know the condition that somebody has? Do they have glaucoma? How much are they still able to see? What medication do they need to keep to manage the glaucoma? Have they got macular degeneration? How does that affect them? What do they find? What can they still do? What can they find more difficult? But those kind of things. Many people, as I've already mentioned, still need to wear glasses even with a sight loss. Again, sometimes we find that confusing, because if they can't see, well, why do they need to wear glasses? But there's different parts of the eye that are being affected by whether or not you wear glasses to a sight condition. So it's important to make sure that residents are wearing the correct glasses and that they've got correct and up-to-date prescriptions. So getting the regular eye checks at least every 2 years. If people, for example, have different glasses for different tasks, for reading or for distance, helping them to make sure they're wearing the right glasses by maybe labelling them, or keeping them in a particular place, helping people locate them, helping people change them for different tasks, that kind of thing. Regular eye checks, at least every 2 years. Some people might need them more frequently if they've got a history of, for example, glaucoma in the family, or if they've already had problems with their vision. The opticians may recommend more regular eye checks, and making sure that they take any medication for eye, particularly eye drops, is given correctly, and making sure it's going into the eye. And there is lots of information around about, if you Google the International Glaucoma Association, for example, there's information on there about how to give eye drops correctly, because it's really important for managing it, so reducing the risk of the glaucoma deteriorating.
Would you say then that when people first come into a care home, that having an eye test as early as possible within their admission is a good thing, or should we just try and sort of assess whether they're going to need one?
I think it's important to ask the question at admission if they know when their last eye test was.
Okay.
And if they're not sure, to see if you can establish that, maybe through a family member, if they know when their last eye test was. And if not, then to recommend that they have one.
Okay.
So obviously eye tests in Scotland are free. and they can do domiciliary visits as well.
Yeah.
So it's really important that any changes to vision are picked up early and intervention put in place as quickly as possible. The longer it goes on, the harder it is for people to adapt, which is why the early intervention is being pushed. So we're trying to encourage.
So that would be one of the reasons then why it was hidden in care homes to a large extent, because we don't do that when people come into care. We don't sort of say let's give that a whole check. Let's see what the issues are. Yeah,
you need to do that. I mean,
because if we said every 2 years and we had eye testing every 2 years, then there'd be a number of people in care homes who would not be in care homes for 2 years. People don't live that long in care homes anymore.
Yeah.
So so we would need to check that out.
Yeah. So I think on admission, it's important to establish that, because then if you're not doing it then you're not going to be picking that up, and it's really important. Yeah. And if those last couple of years of life can be quite difficult.
Yeah.
If that's something that can be supported, then that can improve people's quality of life significantly. And using the care plan to record those support needs is really important. However your care plans work, I would imagine it's different.
Everywhere is different, yes.
But having some way of recording it, and if you want, we'd be happy to give you some information and advice if you needed that, about how to do that. If people do come into the home and they already have a visual impairment and they already have daily living aids that they use, is helping them to make sure that they're still using them, that they're still maintaining their independence, whether they've got a liquid level indicator, for example, that helps them make tea, whether they've got magnification that they use for reading or for doing small tasks, whatever it is. Make sure that you support them to use their daily living aids so they can maintain their independence. I know it can be difficult in a care home environment to do that. You've got lots of different people with lots of different needs, but it is important that we try and encourage people to be active.
Okay.
Think about some simple adaptations that might help the person, and there's lots of simple things that can make a difference. There's very two small examples I've used is, for example, if somebody is struggling to get themselves dressed, it might be because they're struggling to choose their clothes. So could you, for example, write some large print labels to hang on their clothes so they can see them? Or could you use some kind of tactile reference that they can use so they know that things that have got a triangle on them are blue and match, and things that have got a circle on them are white and match, or something, whatever system works. The system has to work for the person. It doesn't have to work for you, otherwise it's not helping them be independent. So it's about working with the person and find out what's going to help. Obviously, some people may not have enough vision to read large print labels, it's about exploring with them what's important for that person. Do you have simple things like large print menus? So large print would be at least size 16, but possibly up to size 24 print. Really easy to produce nowadays. Usually you can just do it on the computer, and print it off. Again, for some people that might just be a really simple thing that means that they can read the menus themselves. So in terms of adapting social activities, there's lots of different things that you can do. A lot of it might be about making it a bit more tactile, or again using large print. So for example, large print bingo numbers. You can get large print playing cards, or playing cards that have got Braille on them as well, if you've got people who read Braille. You can get dice that are tactile, so you can feel the number of dots. That's an example of a large print Scrabble, so that the Scrabble bits are slightly bigger than normal, so it's easier to see. Other things that you can use, games where it's kind of things are sort of ball and bat games. I know we've got games that we use with some of our older people, where they've got soft squishy balls that they throw at a big coloured mat, and that's a way of they do quizzes like that. Or just kind of using interactive and tactile and sort of movement-based, sort of kinetic movements, and proprioceptic, is that the technical name for it, I think, activities, something like that. So it's adapting it in ways that everybody can participate, rather than thinking, well, that person doesn't see very well, so they won't be able to do it. Using colour contrast around edges and doors and tables and furnishings and food, and we'll give you some more examples. So this is an example. This is actually our office in Aberdeen that we have. So all the corners, all the skirting boards, the handrails are bright red against a pale grey background. You can see the corduroy markings on the ground, which shows that there's a step approaching. The edges of the stairs and the nosings of the stairs are bright yellow, so it's easy for people to see. And you can see that on both doors, so it's easy for people to locate the handles and the handrails. If there isn't colour contrast, somebody might struggle to find the handrails, might struggle to see the hazard warnings of the edge of the stairs, and that makes it much more difficult for them to navigate that space independently. Here, for example, you can see the table settings. What would you rather eat from? I think I'd certainly rather eat from one of the ones that are a bit coloured, because if you put cauliflower, mash and white fish on a white plate, on a white tablecloth, you're not going to be able to see it to eat it.
Now, you see, I would go for the whole white and silver look. The blue and the red don't interest me at all.
Yeah, but if you're visually impaired...
visually impaired would be different, but as a matter of choice, I would go for the all white.
See, I personally like the blue and white one. But that's, again, maybe that's just because I'm now surrounded by colour contrast day in, day out, and I've got used to it. But it's something to bear in mind. You might prefer
yes,
that.
Oh, yes, yes.
But for somebody who's visually impaired,
yeah.
would struggle potentially to see where everything is. And adding that colour contrast can just make it easier for people to find things. This is an example of colour contrast used in the bathrooms. Toilet seats, it's actually quite important to have toilet seats that are colour contrasted. One of the big issues around about falling is people getting up to the toilets at night and either lights not going on or not going on quick enough, and then not quite making it to the toilet because they can't quite see where it is. So using colour contrast in the bathroom can make a big difference. So they can find the seats, they can find the handrails, and in this picture they've got the bin as a different colour as well, so it's easier to locate against the background. And people need extra lighting. I've mentioned that already. So whether that might be good, even natural lighting throughout the communal areas, but some people might need extra lighting. For example, if somebody likes sewing, they might want to have a magnified light, which is just enough to be able to allow them to do those kind of tasks. Or in kitchens, often there's extra lighting is required. So it's important to think about lighting. And again, rehab workers can give you, rehabilitation for visual impairment workers can give you advice about that. Some residents might need some help with orientation to the environment. So they might, if they're not seeing signs, for example, or if they're new arriving in the home, they might need a bit of time to help you walk around and help them identify landmarks so they know where they are. So if they get lost, they can think, right, no, I know there's a set of steps here, and I know that handrail means I'm at this corner, and I know that on the other side there's a letterbox, and that tells me I'm in some other place. So identifying key landmarks to help them find where they are in relation to the space that they're in is really quite important. So spend some time, and they won't need to do it just once. They might need to do it a few times to practice it and get that sort of mental map in their brain, so they know where they are. And obviously, as people are getting older, they may be becoming a bit forgetful as well. So you may need to go over it over and over again, which might be frustrating for you, but is really important for that resident. Think about accessing audio description services as well as subtitles, for example, on television. Audio description is now built into most TV providers. So again, explore that for people. It might help them enjoy. They may no longer be able to see the screen very well on the TV. They may no longer be able to read subtitles. Some will do and some won't. But think about the audio description services. They may or may not have heard of audio description. So you can introduce that idea and help them explore that and see if that helps them. You can help people access things like audiobooks and talking newspapers. I've included the link there to Angus talking newspapers. I think, if I remember rightly, they've got ones from all the local towns. So you can go and have a look and sign up, and they're sent out free. Nest, we've got a small postal audiobook library as well that you can sign up for, and there are lots of other online audiobook libraries that you can sign up for as well. And think about providing information in different formats for people. If people are no longer able to read print, will they manage with large print? Are they a Braille user? If they've been blind from a very young age, they probably will be a Braille user. So you need to make information available in Braille for those residents who are Braille users. Or audio formats. Lots of people now listen to books or information. Computers can produce information on audio through speech-to-text technology. So there's lots of different options that might be available that help people maintain that independence and allow them to keep doing the things they enjoy, but maybe in a slightly different way to what they're used to. Really simple one, but one that people always tell us that we forget to do is always tell the person that you're there and when you leave. Don't assume the person has seen you come into a room or seen you appear on their left side, because they may not have. They may sense somebody being there, but they may not know who you are, and they may not know what you're there for. So again, just tell people, give people that narrative so they know what's going on around about them. Make sure you position food and drink so the person can find it. If you're giving somebody a plate of food, describe what's on the plate. You can use the analogy of a clock face. So, for example, if you're at supper time, you can say at 12 o'clock there's a chicken, at 3 o'clock there's mashed potatoes, and at 6 o'clock there's peas. And describe it like a clock face. And that helps the person find their food and locate it. If you think a person looks like they're not eating, maybe they just need a reminder that their food's in front of them or that their drink's in front of them. They're maybe not seeing it to get that visual reminder. So help them reach for it. Don't just assume that they're not hungry, because they might be really hungry, but just struggling to find a way of saying, I'm hungry, where's my food? Because they're not getting that visual information. If you do write anything down for a resident, sometimes, I don't know, you might need to write a note down, then use thick black pen. It's more likely to be visible to them than your biro. There's a couple of these included in the resource kits for you to have a look at. It's a simple thing, but it can make a huge difference to people.
I'd never come across that piece of advice before.
Have you not?
No.
It's a really simple thing. Lots of people who are visually impaired will use felt tip pens rather than biros, assuming they've got enough vision to see, because it's just easier. It creates better colour contrast.
Oh, yes, I get it entirely, but I've never come across that piece of advice before. I've learned something already today.
In a group activity, get everyone to say their name before you start the activity. Again, this is a really simple thing to do. And if everybody can say their name, then that helps the visually impaired people locate where everybody is in that room as well, because they'll get this kind of the sound clue. So lots of people can actually, once you go around the room, get a rough idea of where everybody is, as well as who is sitting there. Yeah. And again, like we said before, it's difficult to initiate conversation if you don't know who's there. So it's a simple social thing that makes everybody feel involved. And you may have to encourage and support communication. Remember, people are dealing with lots of different things, lots of different difficulties, and you need to help them to to manage that. So in terms of referrals, we're nearly finished now. If you think somebody is experiencing a visual impairment or their vision has changed, then in Scotland, you go to the opticians first. The optician may or may not refer to the person to ophthalmology for treatment. Ophthalmologist may refer to the person for a low vision aid clinic. The low vision aid clinic is a hospital-based clinic that assesses people for magnification support. So if they need a magnifier, for example. At any point in this journey, if somebody is experiencing a significant sight loss, then they can be referred to NES. So either you as a professional carer can refer them, family friend, or the person can refer themselves. We would encourage people to be referred as quickly as possible. So if it looks like somebody's hesitating, then maybe encourage them for you to make that referral. We'll come out and do an assessment with them, have a chat about what's going on for them, and work with them to look at the different things that might help, and we can probably give you a bit of information and advice as well. So this is our contact details. To phone, it's 03452712345, or email info@anysensoryservices.org. There is an SMS number as well. That's text only, so that's for people who are deaf really, but it's 07593102002. And there is a referral form on our website, and that's the link to it. We have got a duty worker available Monday to Friday 2 till 4, but you can phone at any time and we can process the referral from there. So hopefully that gives you a kind of reasonable overview about what visual impairment is and how it affects people, and some ideas about how you might support some of your residents. In terms of the resource kits has got some sim specs which simulate some of the different visual conditions. It's got a little bit more information about sight loss and some daily living aids as well for you to try out, and just to give you an idea of some of the range of different ways that things can be adapted, or different ways of doing things. So make a plan for how you want to use it. There is a suggested plan involved in the kit that we will email out to you before you do this. Yeah. Make your plan, discuss it with Ivan at Scottish Care, when you book it out, so that we see that. These are resources that have been paid for by Angus Society for Blind, so we ask that you treat them with respect and make sure it's all returned for you to the box. And when you do get the resource kits, we suggest that you keep them for 2 weeks, make a plan of how they're going to use them, try the sim specs in different environments and in different lighting conditions. Some will work differently in different environments, so try them out. Watch the video on the DVD about sighted guiding and have a go. Use blindfolds to do that. So one person guiding the other person, and take it turnabout, always making sure that you're keeping each other safe. And explore some. There's a very small range of daily living aids that we've included in there. So trying to show the range of different things. So try them out with blindfolds, with sim specs. Think about your residents. Think about who might benefit from some changes like this, from some of the adaptations. And there's much more information on our website, Thomas Pocklington as well website, and the RNIB website is full of information as well. So hope you find this useful, and good luck with the kits, and thank you very much.